The sky of Orvath 9 was the color of molten copper, veined with drifting clouds that glowed faintly as dusk approached. The air shimmered with humidity, and the dense canopy below steamed like a vast cauldron. From the moment the drop pod split open, the cadets knew the planet was alive in ways no simulation had prepared them for. The assignment was simple in theory: survive for 60 days using only native resources, but Ilara Holt understood what that really meant. The instructors wanted to see who could adapt, not who could endure. It was a test of minds more than bodies. She stepped from the pod and felt her boots sink into the spongy moss. It smelled sweet, like fermenting fruit. Around her, the other cadets emerged, a kaleidoscope of alien biology. The insectoid cliques clicked their armored jaws and fanned their translucent wings, their compound eyes glinting like jewels in the orange light. The crystalline thrix moved slowly, their angular bodies refracting light into sharp shards that danced across the trees. The amphibious pelagi slithered toward the nearby swamp, their gill flaps pulsing in the humid air. The reptilian tarn stood apart, tall and rigid, their scaled hides glistening with oil. And hovering silently at the edge of the clearing were the Lyran, telepaths who communicated through pulses of color in their pupils, unsettling in their quiet precision. For the first few hours, the group worked together out of politeness and curiosity. They collected fruits from the jungle, scooped up glowing fungi from fallen trunks, and gathered what looked like edible roots. A Clix named Vorak proudly tore open one of the bulbous plants, releasing a puff of pale gas, and began devouring the fibrous strands inside. The pelagi followed suit, tasting the juices and humming softly in approval. Ilara stayed back, cautious. The thrix did not eat at all. They absorbed energy through mineral dust, and none of that existed on this swampy world. The tarn roasted a few mushrooms over a small flame, their rough laughter echoing through the clearing. For a fleeting moment, it looked like a shared feast, like a victory for unity. But the illusion shattered within hours. It started with the pelagi collapsing. The song that had filled the night turned into gurgling spasms as one after another began vomiting dark fluid into the soil. The tarn rushed to help, but when one touched the pelagi's skin, his own scales began to blister from contact. A cry rose from the thrix side of the camp as one of them cracked apart, his body crystallizing in irregular fractures after tasting a slice of the same fruit that the Clix had eaten without harm. Panic followed. The Lyran's eyes flared red in warning, and their telepathic shrieks flooded the minds of everyone nearby, a storm of fear and accusation. The air grew thick with the stench of acid and bile. Ilara pressed her hands against her ears, though she knew it wouldn't block the sound. It wasn't sound at all, but thought, raw and invasive. When dawn came, the camp was silent except for shallow breathing and the buzz of flies. 3 pelagi were dead. The tarn were furious, convinced the Clix had poisoned the food on purpose. The Clix, offended and defensive, spread their wings in a display of threat. The Lyran stood between them, but their psychic attempts at calming only deepened the confusion, translating anger into more anger. The thrix retreated to the edge of the clearing, scraping mineral dust from the stones in vain. Ilara stood in the middle of it all, staring at the remains of the feast. The fruits had looked harmless, almost beautiful. Bright red pods, soft roots, luminous fungi, but each species metabolized differently. What was a delicacy to one was venom to another. By the end of the second day, alliances had formed like cracks in cooling lava. The tarn built shelters of bone and wood, guarding their fire. The Clix moved their camp higher, where the air was thinner and less humid. The pelagi survivors vanished into the swamp to seek food more suited to their kind. The Lyran floated between groups, gathering information, always watching, but never committing. Ilara built her small shelter apart from them all, a crude frame of sticks and leaves, enough to keep out the endless rain. She chewed on one of the protein bars from her emergency ration pack, the last one she allowed herself. Her mind raced with calculations comparing biological data from her training to the chaos she'd witnessed. It was obvious now. This was not a test of individual survival, but of coexistence, and everyone was failing. The following morning, the camp looked more like a battlefield than a cooperative colony. The tarn accused the Clix again, after finding one of their own paralyzed from what he claimed was Clix venom hidden in his food. The Clix screeched back that the tarn had stolen from their supply pile, The Lyran tried to mediate, but their calm telepathic signals turned volatile when filtered through fear. Every word became a weapon. The Thrix watched from a distance, unblinking, as if waiting for the inevitable collapse. Elara observed quietly. She wasn't immune to hunger, but humans were omnivores, adaptable, resilient, used to scarcity. She could survive on less, at least for a while. But the others couldn't. She saw it in the dulling color of the Lyran's eyes, in the cracks forming along the Thrix's crystalline arms, in the slow movements of the Tarn as dehydration set in. The camp was dying, not from predators or weather, but from incompatibility. That night, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. A storm rolled over the horizon, painting the sky in flashes of blue lightning. The rain was thick, almost syrupy, coating everything in a slick layer of film that made movement difficult. Elara sat beneath the overhang of her shelter, staring into the dark. She thought of the food pits, the heaps of discarded fruits, the piles of uneaten roots and fungi already rotting at the edge of the camp. The smell was unbearable, but something about it intrigued her. Rot was just uncontrolled change. In decay, new life formed. Bacteria, enzymes, reactions. She remembered a lesson from her biochemistry module. Decomposition is transformation. That phrase lingered in her mind like a spark. She stood and pulled on her gloves. Moving through the mud, she gathered bits of spoiled food from each species pile. She ignored the disgusted looks from a Tarn sentry who muttered that she was collecting death. She carried it all to the lowest part of the clearing, where the rainwater pooled into a shallow basin. There, she began to dig. The ground was soft and warm, the scent earthy beneath the rot. She dug until the hole reached her knees, then dumped everything inside. The poisonous fruits, the moldy fungi, even crushed mineral fragments left behind by the Thrix. Steam rose as the heat from the organic matter met the cool night air. She covered it all with mud and leaves, pressing the surface flat. She had no tools, no containers, just instinct and memory. But she marked the spot with a flat stone and scratched a simple pattern into it, 6 lines crossing in the center, 1 for each species. When she returned to her shelter, she was soaked and shivering, but for the first time since arrival, she felt a flicker of purpose. Around her, the camp remained divided. Fires burned in isolated clusters. The rain fell harder, washing away the tracks between them. The jungle hummed with unseen creatures. Elara closed her eyes and listened to the storm, her mind replaying the events of the past 2 days. She could still hear the Pelagi's song before it turned to choking. She could see the Thrix cracking like glass. She thought of the Academy's motto, adapt or perish. The instructors probably believed this planet would prove that no mixed-species team could truly cooperate. She intended to prove them wrong. As the night deepened, a faint glow rose from the buried mound at the edge of the camp, unnoticed by anyone but the small scavenger insects that swarmed to its warmth. The rain hissed as it met the steaming earth, releasing a strange, almost sweet scent into the air. In that pit of decay, unseen life had already begun to stir, a quiet transformation that would, in time, feed not just one, but all. By the 5th morning, the air above the camp hung heavy with tension, and the thin mist rising from the wet ground carried the smell of fear more than the scent of life. The cadets had stopped talking except to accuse, whisper, or demand. The makeshift camps that once formed a circle had fractured completely. Now there were 6 distant fires burning separately, each one guarded as if the others were enemies. Elara could feel the unspoken hostility whenever she crossed the clearing to fetch water. The Tarn no longer nodded in acknowledgement. The Clix clicked their mandibles when she passed, a sharp, threatening sound. The Lyran simply stared with their ever-shifting eyes that pulsed faint colors, their minds unreadable to anyone but themselves. The food crisis had worsened. The Pelagi survivors had not returned from the swamp, and the Thrix had stopped moving altogether, standing motionless at the edge of the forest as though in meditation. The Clix had plenty of food for themselves, vines and roots that reeked of ammonia, but it was useless to others. The Tarn roasted worms over their fire, a smell that made Elara gag. For her, rationing had turned into starvation. She had eaten nothing but boiled moss and sips of filtered rainwater since the night she buried the refuse pit. Hunger dulled her body but sharpened her mind. It made her notice details that fear had hidden. The way the soil near the pit steamed faintly each morning, the subtle vibration that spread through the ground when she stepped near it, and the insects that gathered there. feeding and living, despite the poisonous mixture buried below. The storm had passed, but its damage lingered. Several shelters had collapsed, and much of the camp's equipment was ruined by mud. Arguments erupted daily. The Tarn accused the Cliques of poisoning the water supply when one of their young fainted after drinking from the shared barrel. The Cliques retaliated by hurling accusations that the Tarn had stolen their resin tools. The Lyran tried to calm them, but the Tarn despised telepathic intrusion, and when one Lyran dared to enter a Tarn's mind to stop a fight, the reptilian cadet nearly decapitated him with a stone blade. Ilara witnessed the aftermath, a pool of dark green blood, and the Lyran trembling on the ground, whispering apologies in pulses of color. The instructors who had dropped them here would have called this an exercise in interspecies dynamics. To Ilara, it was a slow disintegration of civilization. That night, she sat alone by her fire, small and weak, just enough to dry her soaked clothes. She turned a piece of bark in her hands, absent-mindedly scratching lines into it with a sharpened stick. She was thinking of the pit again, wondering if her experiment had changed anything beneath the soil. Science had always been her comfort. It replaced fear with curiosity. As the flames flickered, she made a decision. She would open one of the smaller pits she had made in secret near the roots of an enormous tree, one she had filled with spoiled fruits and mineral dust scraped from Thrick's crystals. The others would mock her if she failed, but the camp was collapsing anyway. Failure no longer scared her. At dawn, she walked into the jungle, silent and barefoot to avoid drawing attention. The air was thick with moisture and the low hum of unseen creatures. When she reached the tree, she knelt by the mound she had made and began to dig with her hands. The top layer was cool, but deeper down the soil was warm, unnaturally warm. A faint hiss escaped when she broke the crust, followed by a puff of gas that smelled like vinegar and sulfur. Her eyes watered, but she kept going. What she uncovered wasn't rot anymore, it was something else. The plant fibers had dissolved into a soft, clay-like mass, glistening faintly green. Curious, she took a small piece and dropped it into her flask of water. The bubbles that formed were slow and steady, releasing the same smell she had noticed at night. She closed the flask, watching as the liquid turned cloudy. Something inside was alive. Fermentation, not decay. A branch cracked behind her. She spun around to see a Tarn watching, his yellow eyes narrowing suspiciously. He was taller than her by 2 heads, his body wrapped in dried leaves like armor. His name was Carex, one of the oldest cadets, known for his short temper and absolute disdain for soft species like humans. "What are you doing, human?" he hissed, his tongue flicking the air. She tried to keep her tone even. "Experimenting. I think I found a way to make food safe." He snorted, stepping closer. "You're playing with garbage. You'll poison us all again." She looked him in the eye. "Maybe, or maybe I'll save you." The Tarn studied her for a long moment, then spat into the mud. "If you die from your own foolishness, I won't bury you." He turned and walked away. She exhaled shakily, half laughing at the absurdity of it. If the experiment worked, it would prove him wrong. If not, she'd die quietly, and at least the Tarn would get his wish. By midday, the camp was on the verge of another explosion. The Lyran had stolen a container of Tarn water, claiming it for testing. The Tarn responded by burning part of the Lyran shelter. The Cliques shrieked and joined the chaos, claiming the heat was destroying their nesting resin. Ilara arrived just as the first punch was thrown, an ugly, wet sound as the Tarn's fist cracked into a Lyran's jaw. She jumped between them before anyone could react, shouting over the noise, "Stop! All of you! You're killing each other over poison and dirt!" For a moment, the fight froze. The Tarn glared down at her, nostrils flaring. "You dare speak for us, human?" She didn't flinch. "I'm speaking for survival. None of us will live another week if this continues." The Cliques clicked in disagreement, but their wings folded uncertainly. The Lyran's eyes flashed pale blue, which she had learned meant curiosity. She raised her hands. "Give me 1 day. 1. If I fail, you can go back to tearing each other apart." Surprisingly, no one objected. The Tarn grunted, turning away. The Cliques muttered among themselves. The Lyran tilted their heads, then nodded slowly. She didn't waste the fragile piece. She gathered her flask and her samples and returned to her shelter, where she began to work in earnest. Using scraps of torn containers and the hollow husks of fruits, she created small test vessels. filling each with portions of the fermented mixture and adding drops of water from different sources. One flask for each species, adjusted for pH, temperature, and salinity. It was crude biochemistry in the dirt, but she remembered enough from training to know what to look for. Color change, heat release, and gas formation. The air around her soon filled with strange smells, some sweet, others sharp and metallic. By nightfall, she had 6 tiny containers lined up in the mud, each glowing faintly under the bioluminescent insects that drifted through the dark. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she forced herself to stay awake, taking notes by the dim light of her fire. The Thrix mixture showed faint crystalline growth, a good sign. The Pelagi variant bubbled slowly, forming a thin film on top that shimmered under the light. The Tarn mixture smelled like iron and smoke, but it didn't rot, which was a miracle in itself. The Lyran sample produced no visible reaction at all, but the pH stabilized, a sign that it wasn't toxic. The Click's mix was aggressive, devouring whatever she added. It reminded her of acid, and she marked it as unstable. Only the human sample looked balanced, sweet, neutral, alive. She stared at it for a long time, her eyelids heavy. When she finally drifted into sleep, the forest was eerily silent. But deep within the pit she had dug, unseen organisms continued their slow, relentless work. By morning, she woke to voices. The Tarn had gathered near her shelter, along with 2 Clicks and 1 Lyran. Carex was among them, glaring down at her experiments. "You said one day," he growled. "The day is over." She rubbed her eyes, blinking away exhaustion. "It's not over yet," she said softly. "Look." She pointed to the Thrix sample, which had begun to release faint tendrils of steam. Carex leaned in cautiously, sniffed, and pulled back with a confused expression. "It smells warm." "That's heat from metabolic conversion," she explained. "Life breaking down toxins into something edible. The same process your own stomach uses, only outside your body." The Clicks hissed uncertainly, but the Lyran reached out, their eyes glowing pale green, a sign of fascination. The Tarn's suspicion softened, though his pride would not let him admit it. "And what will you feed us, human?" "Mud and fumes." She smiled faintly. "If that's what it takes to keep us alive, yes." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Lyran nodded slowly. "Show us tomorrow," he said in a melodic tone that carried faint psychic resonance. Alara felt her pulse quicken. Tomorrow would be the test. If her theory was wrong, she'd not only fail, but confirm what everyone already believed, that humans were reckless dreamers who thought logic could tame chaos. But if she was right, the pit would yield something that could bridge 6 different biologies. She looked at the faintly steaming containers, each one a fragile promise in the mud, and whispered to herself, "Just one more night." As darkness fell again over Orvath 9, distant lightning flashed beyond the horizon. The fires burned lower now, the arguments quieter. Somewhere in the jungle a beast roared, but no one moved. The cadets sat by their separate shelters, exhausted and uncertain, and for the first time since the landing, the silence between them was not entirely hostile. Hidden under layers of earth, the buried pit pulsed faintly with heat. Something was changing there, slow, invisible, inevitable. Ilara lay awake, listening to the faint rhythm of bubbles rising through the mud, her mind alive with calculation and hope. She didn't know yet that her quiet experiment had already begun to alter more than the food. It was transforming the air, the soil, and perhaps even the fragile bonds between them all. The morning broke with a low rumble that trembled through the ground, as if the planet itself was exhaling. Alara woke to that sound and sat upright, her heart already racing. For a moment, she thought it was another storm approaching, but the sky was clear. The vibration came from beneath the earth, from the direction of the main pit. She threw on her jacket, grabbed her tools, and ran barefoot through the dew-soaked ferns until she reached the low basin she had dug days ago. The soil shimmered with heat. Thin trails of vapor rose from cracks in the mud, winding through the cool air like ghostly ribbons. The surface pulsed faintly, expanding and sinking as though something alive breathed beneath it. She crouched beside the mound, pressed her ear to the damp soil, and heard the faintest sound, a slow bubbling, steady and rhythmic. The smell was sharp, but not rotten anymore. It was tangy, almost metallic. The pit was fermenting faster than she expected. She scraped a thin layer of mud away, and saw that the color underneath had changed to a glowing amber. The transformation was happening not just chemically, but visibly. The decayed mixture she had buried was now luminous. She filled a small vial and held it against the sunlight. The liquid was thick, swirling with motes that shimmered gold and green. It was beautiful and terrifying because she had no idea if it was stable. When she returned to camp, she found Carex waiting by her shelter. His arms were crossed, and his expression was unreadable. "You said today," he reminded her. "You have something to show us." She held up the vial. "I think this is it." The Tarn snorted, unimpressed. "That looks like swamp water." She ignored his tone. "Maybe, but it's alive, and I think it can feed us all." He followed her back toward the clearing, grumbling, but he didn't stop her. The others were already gathering, drawn by curiosity or by the faint scent carried by the wind from the pit. The cliques buzzed their wings, cautious but intrigued. The Lyran floated silently above the ground, their eyes shifting from violet to pale gold. A color she had learned meant anticipation. Even one Thrix had moved closer, his body refracting light in slow pulses. Elara set down her pack, uncorked the vial, and poured a few drops into a shallow shell filled with water. The mixture reacted instantly, tiny bubbles rising, releasing a faint warmth. "This is fermentation," she explained, kneeling so they could see. "Microbes are breaking down what we couldn't eat into simpler compounds. I adjusted each pit for temperature, salinity, and mineral content. This one," she lifted the shell slightly, "is from the main source. If it works, it'll neutralize toxins and convert starches into sugars and amino acids that all of us can process." The Tarn folded his arms. "You think we'll drink your poison brew because you say some words about sugar?" The Lyran's voice was soft and melodic, but it cut through his skepticism. "She asks for proof. Let her show it." Elara took a deep breath. She dipped a small piece of dried plant matter into the mixture and watched it dissolve slowly, leaving a residue of fine powder. She then placed the tip of her finger into the warm liquid and touched it to her tongue. The taste was bitter, but not unpleasant, like strong vinegar. Nothing happened. No burning. No sickness. "It's not poison," she said quietly. "It's the first step." The Tarn's nostrils flared. "That proves nothing. Human stomachs can eat dirt and survive." The cliques clicked impatiently. "Let her continue," one of them hissed. Elara nodded gratefully and retrieved her other samples, each one tailored for a different physiology. She handed the mineral-heavy one to the Thrix, who stared at it with hollow crystal eyes. He hesitated, then extended his clawed hand and let a single drop fall onto his surface. The spot shimmered faintly before fading. "No corrosion," he said in a low, echoing tone. "It is tolerable." The cliques tried next, touching the liquid with a long, serrated tongue. He flinched but did not collapse. "Warm," he muttered. "Not deadly." One by one, the others tested their samples, hesitant, silent. No one fell ill. The Tarn still refused to try. "You're wasting time," he said, his voice rough with contempt. "Even if it doesn't kill us, it won't feed us." Elara met his gaze calmly. "You're right. It's not food yet, but it can become food." She gestured toward the pit. "I need to harvest enough material to cook. I need your help." The camp went still. The idea of cooperation seemed almost alien now. After a long pause, the Lyran stepped forward first. "I will assist," he said, his eyes glowing faintly green. That broke the silence. The cliques moved next, then the Thrix. Carex glared but eventually grunted and joined them. They spent the next few hours working under the rising heat of the day. Elara directed them with calm precision. The cliques dug channels with their forelimbs. The Tarn carried heavy stones. The Thrix crushed minerals to line the walls. And the Lyran maintained a telepathic link, translating her gestures into meaning for those who didn't understand her words. For the first time since arrival, the clearing buzzed with something other than anger. It buzzed with purpose. Steam rose as they uncovered the main pit, revealing a churning mass of translucent fluid that pulsed with light. The sight made the Tarn step back. "That's unnatural," he said. "It's alive," she corrected him, "and it's hungry for transformation." When the pit was fully open, Elara used a carved wooden ladle to collect the thickest layer. She poured it into the stone basins they had built and mixed in crushed roots, broken fruit, and powdered minerals. The reaction began immediately. A soft hissing, followed by a gentle warmth that spread through the air. The smell was strange but oddly comforting, like wet soil after rain. The Lyran knelt beside her, fascinated. "You are feeding it to create more," she nodded. "Exactly. It's a chain reaction. It consumes the toxins and replaces them with nutrients." The Clix tilted his head. "So the poison becomes food?" "Yes," she said quietly. "That's the point." As the sun dipped low, the surface of the basins turned a golden brown. The warmth intensified until even the Tarn admitted he could feel it radiating through his scales. Ilara took a sample from the top layer, spread it thin across a flat stone, and set it near the fire to dry. Within an hour, it hardened into a flaky bread-like sheet. She broke a small piece off and held it to her lips. It tasted earthy and faintly sour, but it filled her mouth with warmth. She swallowed and waited. No sickness, no dizziness. She smiled and turned to the group. "It's ready." No one moved at first. The Tarn glared, suspicious as ever. "Eat it yourself," he said. She did. Again, deliberately, slowly. Then she gestured for the others. The Lyran stepped forward and took a piece, placing it delicately into his mouth. His eyes flickered once, then brightened to a deep gold. "Safe," he said. The Clix followed, snapping the shard between his mandibles. He made a clicking noise that sounded almost like laughter. "Sweet," he admitted. Finally, Carex took a piece, grumbling under his breath. He bit into it, expecting pain or poison. Instead, he froze. His jaw moved slowly. His eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. "It is warm," he muttered. "It burns like fire, but not with pain." Ilara nodded. "That's energy. That's life." As night fell, the entire camp gathered around the pit. The flames from the fires reflected off the bubbling golden mixture, casting dancing patterns on the trees. The insects had returned, swarming above the warmth, glowing faintly blue in the dark. For the first time, there were no arguments, no fights. The air was filled only with the soft sounds of eating, breathing, and disbelief. The Lyran began to hum a low tone that resonated through the clearing. The Thrix added a rhythmic tapping, his crystalline limbs producing a melody. Even the Clix joined, clattering their wings in sync. It wasn't planned, but somehow it became music, a shared rhythm born from hunger and survival. When the song faded, Ilara sat quietly by the pit, her hands stained with the same golden hue that glowed in the mud. The others drifted back to their shelters, but she remained, staring into the slow swirl of bubbles. She knew this was just the beginning. The fermentation had stabilized faster than she dared hope, but it needed time to adapt, to refine. What she had created wasn't just food. It was a living system, one that could learn and evolve with every feeding cycle. She could feel the potential humming beneath her fingertips. Carex lingered a moment longer than the rest, his silhouette outlined against the firelight. "You may have delayed death," he said quietly, "but we are still trapped here." She looked up at him and smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least now we can live while we wait." He grunted, not unkindly this time, and turned away. She watched him go, her thoughts already spinning ahead, to scaling the process, to stabilizing it, to proving that what she had started wasn't an accident. When the camp finally fell silent, she closed her eyes and listened. The pit's gentle breathing filled the night like the heartbeat of a newborn creature. She whispered softly to herself, not as a scientist, but as someone in awe. "You're alive," she said, "and you're going to save us all." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of warmth and fermentation through the jungle. Somewhere in the distance, a predator howled, but it sounded faint, almost reverent. The planet that had sought to starve them was now feeding them through her hands. Ilara sat there until dawn, watching the pit pulse with life, knowing that from this moment on, nothing about survival or unity would ever be the same. The sun rose pale and trembling over Orvath 9, washing the mist-covered clearing in a quiet golden haze. Smoke from the previous night's fires still drifted lazily through the trees, curling above the camp that no longer looked like a battlefield. For the first time in weeks, Ilara didn't wake to shouting or the sound of metal striking stone. Instead, she woke to a soft, rhythmic sound. Someone was stirring the basins at the fermentation pit. She pushed herself upright, her muscles aching, and saw Carex crouched there, his scaled hands carefully lifting the ladle she had carved. The Tarn's eyes glinted in the dim light as he watched the surface bubble. When he noticed her, he froze. as if embarrassed to be caught performing a human's task. "You're early," she said softly, her voice still hoarse from sleep. He didn't look at her, but his tone carried a grudging respect. The smell changed overnight. It no longer reeks of rot. She joined him by the pit, kneeling on the damp ground. "It's stabilizing," she explained. "The microbes are finding balance. They've learned how to feed each other." He frowned. "You speak as if it's alive." She smiled faintly. "It is. Life doesn't always look the way we expect." He grunted and returned to stirring, his large hands surprisingly gentle. By mid-morning, the others emerged. The Lyran floated silently, their eyes glowing with tranquil blue light that reflected off the steam. The Cliques arrived next, carrying their resin tools to help shape the pit's rim. Even the Thrix, who had remained aloof since the first tasting, came closer, his body refracting the light into fractured rainbows across the ground. No one had to be called. They simply came, drawn by the scent, the rich, warm smell that hung in the air, reminding every creature present of food, of home, of survival. Ilara directed quietly, adjusting the fire pits around the basins, making sure the temperature stayed consistent. The sound of bubbling was steady, soothing. When the first wave of heat rolled through the clearing, she saw something miraculous happen. The mixture began to separate naturally. The top layer thickened, forming a pale foam that hardened into crust. Beneath it, the liquid became clear. She realized the ecosystem inside the pit had matured faster than she imagined. It wasn't just surviving, it was self-organizing. Each microbial group was carving out its place in a miniature world. She touched the crust, and it felt warm and soft, like bread fresh from an oven. The Cliques buzzed their wings in excitement. "Eat again," one of them clicked. Ilara hesitated. The previous batch had been crude and barely edible. This time the mixture smelled more complex, sweet, earthy, faintly spicy. It was tempting, but she knew the risk of haste. Before she could answer, the Lyran extended a slender hand toward the pit and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind over glass. "We are ready to trust." The words were simple, but their weight silenced the clearing. Carex looked from the Lyran to Ilara as if waiting for her command. She nodded. "Let's do it together." They formed a semicircle around the pit. Ilara broke the crust into portions, each one steaming faintly. She handed the first to Carex. The Tarn's claws brushed her hand as he took it. He examined the piece suspiciously, then bit off a corner. His eyes narrowed, his throat moved once, and then he exhaled, a slow breath that sounded like release. "It tastes alive," he said, half amazed, half afraid. She smiled. "It is alive." He took another bite. The Cliques followed, devouring their portion quickly, their wings vibrating with pleasure. The Thrix held his piece to his crystalline mouth and let it dissolve slowly, the light within his body pulsing brighter. The Lyran closed his eyes, absorbing the aroma before taking a delicate bite. His voice trembled softly, reverberating in the minds of everyone present. "It carries harmony." Ilara took her own piece last. It was chewy now, firm but warm, and the taste reminded her of sourdough, mixed with something ancient and mineral. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. The jungle noise faded, and all she could feel was the heat of life spreading through her chest. When she opened her eyes again, the others were watching her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reverence. Carex broke the silence first. "Your pit feeds us, but it does more than that." He tapped his chest. "It softens the inside." She understood what he meant. The warmth wasn't just physical. It carried something deeper, an emotional clarity that none of them could explain. The Lyran's eyes shimmered. "The process binds our chemistries," he murmured. "Our minds align for a moment." Ilara stared into the pit, her pulse quickening. "Maybe the microbes synchronize biofields during fermentation," she suggested, half to herself. "It's possible the chemical changes resonate across nervous systems." The Thrix's voice rumbled like crushed stone. "You speak of science, but this feels like faith." The hours that followed were surreal. The cadets who once despised one another now sat side by side, eating from the same source. Conversations began. Not arguments, but genuine exchanges. The Tarn told stories of his homeworld's desert storms. The Cliques described the sound their wings made during hatching season. The Lyran translated fragments of dreams into words. Even laughter returned, awkward at first, then freer until it echoed through the trees. Ilara felt something inside her unclench. The pit had become more than an experiment. It was a table, a hearth, a place of communion. As the day waned, Ilara began preparing a second batch, this time intentionally adjusting it for taste and energy. She showed the Clicks how to grind roots finer, taught the Thrix how to regulate mineral flow for heat, and asked the Lyran to hum low frequencies to help control the bubbling. The sound waves interacted with the fermentation, creating rhythmic ripples on the surface. She observed the process with fascination, realizing that each species brought something unique to it. The Click's precision, the Tarn's strength, the Lyran harmony, the Thrix patience. She merely guided them, and the result was balance. When night came, the new batch was ready. The smell was intoxicating, richer than anything they had ever produced. The Lyran lit small spheres of bioluminescent gas that floated like lanterns, casting soft light over the clearing. The Thrix ground stones into plates that shimmered faintly, while the Clicks secreted thin films of resin to use as utensils. The Tarn arranged the plates around the pit in a circle, each one equidistant from the next. Without planning it, they had created something that resembled ritual. Ilara stood at the center holding the ladle, and for a moment she didn't feel like a scientist but something older, a keeper of fire. She served the food in silence, one portion to each. No one spoke until everyone had received theirs. Then Carex broke the first piece and offered half to the Lyran beside him. It was a small gesture, but it rippled through the group. The Clicks did the same, sharing with the Thrix. Ilara smiled as she watched them break the barrier that had once divided them. When everyone had eaten, she raised her own piece slightly. "To survival," she said quietly. The others echoed her, voices overlapping, some guttural, some musical, some insectoid. To survival. The first taste of the refined batch was astonishing. The texture was smoother, the warmth deeper, the flavor resonant with faint sweetness. Even the Tarn's stoic face softened. The Lyran's hum deepened into harmony. The Clicks tapped their claws in rhythm. The Thrix released a tone that resonated like a crystal bell. The jungle seemed to join in, distant creatures answering the strange, peaceful chorus that rose from the clearing. Later that night, after the others had fallen asleep around the dying fires, Ilara sat alone beside the pit. The glowing mixture had dimmed to a faint pulse, like the steady heartbeat of something alive beneath the ground. She thought about the transformation she had witnessed, not just in the microbes, but in the beings around her. Survival had begun as a test, a cruel contest of instincts, but it had turned into something else entirely. She wondered if this was what the Academy had intended all along, to see if one species could unite the rest, not through dominance but through understanding. Carex approached quietly, his heavy steps barely disturbing the ground. He stopped beside her, looking down into the pit. "You've changed the camp," he said. His tone held neither anger nor admiration, just a quiet truth. "I didn't," she replied. "We did." He studied her for a moment. "No," he said. "You gave us something to believe in. That's different." He looked at the faint glow, his reflection shimmering on its surface. "When I go home, they will not believe this story." She smiled. "Maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be lived." For a long while they stood in silence, watching the soft rise and fall of the pit's breath. The stars appeared through the canopy, sharp and cold against the dark. Somewhere beyond them, the instructors would be monitoring their progress, expecting a report filled with numbers and data. Ilara realized she no longer cared about their metrics. What mattered was here, in the golden warmth of the pit, in the quiet trust that had taken root among species that once saw only enemies. Before she turned in, she covered the pit with a layer of woven leaves to protect it from the night air. The glow beneath them shone faintly through the gaps, a gentle reminder that life was still working, still transforming. As she lay in her shelter, exhaustion pulling her into sleep, she thought of something her mother had once told her during training. "You can't control life, Ilara. You can only invite it." She smiled in the dark. She had done exactly that. And as the jungle whispered around her, as alien stars watched silently overhead, the pit breathed on, alive, steady, and patient, feeding not only the bodies of those who gathered around it, but the fragile beginnings of something far rarer in the galaxy: trust. The dawn after the second feast came quietly, as though the world itself held its breath. The air over the clearing was light and fragrant, and even the swamp's usual stink seemed gentler. Ilara sat awake before the others, her back against the trunk of a broad-leaved tree, watching the thin ribbons of steam rising from the pit she had covered the night before. She could hear the faint rhythm beneath the earth, the living pulse of her creation, steady and confident now, like a heartbeat that belonged to the planet itself. The golden crust had hardened overnight, and the aroma drifting from it carried a kind of memory, warmth, fire, and life entwined. For the first time since the drop pods landed, the camp smelled not of survival, but of home. As the sun climbed, the cadets began to stir. The cliques emerged first, stretching their wings, their multifaceted eyes glittering with morning light. The Lyran followed, hovering a few inches off the ground, their presence calm and luminous. Even the Tarn woke without hostility, his movements unhurried, his face no longer tense with suspicion. The Thrix stood like a monolith by the pit, his crystalline body refracting the dawn into 1,000 fragments. The camp had changed. It was no longer a patchwork of rival shelters and fearful silences. It had become a small, breathing community. Ilara rose and moved to the pit. The others gathered instinctively, drawn to the warmth. She broke the crust and peered inside. The liquid beneath had turned a clear, shimmering amber. When she stirred it, it released a scent like honey, mixed with minerals, sharp but comforting. She knew then that the culture had stabilized completely. It was no longer fragile. It could sustain itself. She looked up at the faces around her, all so different, yet united by the same faint glimmer of hope in their eyes. "It's ready," she said simply. Carrick stepped forward, his scales glinting faintly in the sun. "Ready for what?" he asked. She smiled. "To live beyond us." He frowned, not understanding. "This isn't just food anymore," she explained. "It's an organism. It adapts to whatever we feed it, and it gives back what we need in return. It doesn't belong to any one of us now. It belongs to all worlds that will ever need it." The Lyran's eyes glowed with pale green light. "You mean it can travel?" She nodded. "It can survive anywhere. All it needs is warmth and something to grow from. It remembers what each of us gave to it. Minerals, enzymes, acids, air. It's learned all our biologies." The realization spread slowly through the group. Even the Thrix, who rarely spoke, let out a low, resonant hum that made the air vibrate. "Then this will end hunger wherever we go," he said. Ilara's smile softened. "If we share it, yes." Carrick's voice lowered. "Do you think the Academy meant for us to find this?" She shook her head. "No. I think they meant for us to fail together, not to survive together. But that's what makes this real." The rest of the day became a blur of motion and quiet cooperation. The cadets worked as if guided by an unspoken understanding. The cliques used their resin to seal containers. The Thrix shaped mineral jars from the cooled rocks. The Lyrans sang low harmonics to calm the microbes and stabilize them for travel. Even Carrick's, grumbling though he was, helped carry the filled jars to the edge of the camp. Ilara moved among them, directing, explaining, recording. Each container glowed faintly with its own hue, some golden, some blue, some green, each tuned to a different biology, each alive with promise. As twilight approached, the jungle began to shimmer with phosphorescent light. The rescue ship was due soon. The instructors had planned a 60-day test, but an early signal from the orbiting beacon suggested retrieval would happen sooner. When the sound came, distant, low, mechanical, it rolled through the air like thunder. The cadets looked up at the streak of silver descending through the clouds. For a long time, none of them spoke. The ship's landing lights cut across the trees, bathing the clearing in artificial white. The silence was thick, not with fear this time, but with something that felt like mourning. None of them wanted to leave the place that had changed them so deeply. When the ramp extended, a pair of armored officers stepped out, scanning the group. One of them, a tall, stern human with a tablet in hand, raised an eyebrow. "Cadet Holt," he called out, recognizing her by uniform. "You've survived. And, remarkably, so have the others." His eyes swept over the aliens gathered behind her, noting their proximity and ease. "I assume you'll want to file your report." Ilara didn't move. Later, she said quietly. She turned to the pit one last time. Steam rose from it in gentle waves, curling like breath. She walked over, knelt beside it, and pressed her hand against the warm crust. The others followed silently. She didn't speak a farewell. The act was enough. One by one, the others placed their hands beside hers. Carrick's clawed palm, the Lyran's translucent fingers, the Clix's chitinous limb, the Thrix's glowing shard of crystal. The pit pulsed once as if in acknowledgement. Then they stepped back. The officers watched, confused, but said nothing. When they boarded the ship, the cadets carried the jars carefully, shielding them as though protecting something sacred. The interior lights were harsh after so many days in the dim glow of the jungle, and the sterile air of the cabin felt lifeless by comparison. The officers began scanning the containers, confused by the readings. These samples, one muttered, show mixed biosignatures across incompatible species. That shouldn't be possible. Ilara only smiled. It's more possible than you think. During debriefing, she presented the data she had collected, chemical ratios, pH shifts, thermal graphs, but it was the story behind it that silenced the entire command deck. She described how a pit of refuse had become the foundation of unity, how a process of decay had turned into creation, how distrust had transformed into nourishment. When she finished, no one spoke for a long while. Finally, the lead instructor, an old Lyran with a soft, silvery voice, said, "You discovered symbiosis in its purest form, born not from design, but from desperation." Ilara looked at him, her voice steady. Desperation is just potential waiting to evolve. In the weeks that followed, her discovery spread beyond the academy. Scientists called it the Holt culture. Within a year, it had been replicated and improved across dozens of systems. Starving colonies on volcanic worlds used it to create stable food sources. Frozen outposts adapted it for protein synthesis in ice-bound soil. Even the military adopted it as a fail-safe ration source for long missions. But what fascinated researchers most wasn't its versatility. It was its intelligence. The microbes within the culture adapted to each new environment, remembering the biochemistry of those who fed it. No one could explain how a handful of alien students and a single human had sparked a self-evolving ecosystem that seemed to understand coexistence better than any civilization before it. As the recognition grew, Ilara refused public ceremonies. She worked quietly in the background, moving from world to oversee the distribution of the culture. The others followed their own paths. Karex became an envoy between the Tarn and the Lyran. The cliques built new hybrid colonies that used the culture to fertilize their crops, and the Thrix incorporated it into their crystal biofarms. The bond between them remained unspoken but unbreakable. They didn't need words to remember what had happened on Orvath 9. Years later, when she returned to that planet, the jungle had reclaimed the clearing. The pit was still there, buried under layers of moss and flowers that glowed faintly at night. She knelt beside it, brushing the soil with her hands. The warmth was gone, but when she dug a little deeper, she found traces of gold still clinging to the roots. She smiled. It had returned to the earth that gave it life. She took a small vial from her bag, filled it with the faintly glowing dust, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she rose, her heart light. Before she left, she looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered like the reflection of the pit's surface, each one a world now nourished by what had begun here. The lesson was simple, yet it would echo through generations. Survival was not about dominance or endurance, but transformation through connection. What began as an experiment in fear had become a story of unity written in the language of microbes and trust. Ilara walked back toward her shuttle as the first drops of warm rain began to fall. Behind her, the jungle breathed softly, and in the faintest shimmer beneath the soil, the remnants of the culture stirred once more, alive, eternal, feeding not just life, but the bond that would carry her name long after she was gone. And so, on a forgotten world that once tested the will of a few lost cadets, a pit of decay became the cradle of a galaxy's renewal. The lesson endured in every colony that thrived, every meal shared between strangers, and every planet where different species learned, finally, that to live was to feed each other.